All right. Just want to welcome everybody out there. Thanks for joining us again. We've got Coach Alan Keene here. He is the head coach of the Great Britain U20 national team, amongst other things. Alan's an incredible guy, so we're really excited, Coach, to have you on today, sharing with us during these interesting times. For all of you guys out there, guys and gals watching different hemispheres, different countries, sit back and enjoy. Make sure that if you have any questions, please use the Q&A function here, and we'll disseminate some of those to Coach as we get going. But Coach, I'm going to hand this over to you, man. Thanks again for being here.
No, I want to say a big thank you to you guys. It's really incredible what you're doing, and you're really going to take up my next 2 weeks. My next 2 weeks in terms of watching all the clinics that you guys are putting out there. So really appreciate you guys having me on.
It's our pleasure, Coach. Thanks again, man. So tell us a little about what you got going on right now.
Well, what I'll do is, Coach, I'll share a presentation I'm going to do. If you could just let me know if that's come up on your screen, and I'll just enlarge it a bit. How's that looking, Coach? Have you got like a presentation out there?
Yes, sir. It looks good.
Awesome. All right. Well, what I'm going to do is take you guys through, I guess in these past, like Zoom has become very prevalent, I think, in the past 7 weeks since this lockdown. But, ironically, what I've been doing with Zoom is kind of availing of its platform for the last 18 months. So, I got together with a couple of my assistant coaches from the national team, Ian McLeod, Mark Jarman, Billy Beddoe. And I said to these guys about 18 months ago, I said, fellas, look, I'm going to start reaching out to coaches from around the world and just see, can I get them on a call for an hour, 45 minutes? Most of them end up being an hour and a half to 2 hours, and said just to pick their brains on certain topics. So it became kind of a very informal way of actually enhancing my professional development as a coach. So really done from a selfish point of view, in order to better myself with certain areas. And I'll take you through, some of the why, the who, and the what of it really. So it all started, I've kind of already unboxed the first one. During the season, I've recognized, and we all realized, it's very difficult to have moments of CPD. So what do I mean by that is, like, you can't get to clinics. The season is a grind. It's 24/7. You're going from game to game, practice to practice, and doing a lot of evaluation and preparation and planning and delivery. That to find time to continue that professional development normally takes a back seat until the summer months, like every coach. So I thought there's got to be an easier way to do it. And that's when the Zoom call idea kind of came up. And I said it to the assistant coaches I worked with. And it just came off the back of a desire to learn and that limited CPD resources. In terms of who we reached out to over the past 18 months, like it's ranged from head coaches to assistant coaches, from head coaches of pro leagues in Australia, all the way over to assistant coaches in the NBA, NCAA coaches, domestic coaches here in the UK where I coach, from under 18s right through to Division I men and BBO. And also we kind of branched it out to people who are working in other domains within our sports, so sports psychologists. And I actually said one of the best Zoom calls I had was with a guy called Bill Bezic, who's a sports psychologist who'd worked with high performance athletes for many years at all levels, like to the highest level you could possibly work with. And when you go from a conversation with somebody like that, you can't help but come away from 90 minutes of a conversation where you go away and take 5 pages of notes. And, it's not to say we used everything we got from these calls, but there was always some nuggets, some takeaways in there that I felt like I could add to my toolbox as a coach. And we also got some players on there. Like one of the better ones we've had during the lockdown period, quarantine period here with COVID-19, was actually with an ex-player, a retired player who played in the Olympics and played for various clubs around Europe and done 4 years in the States at a Division I school. Like his perspective on coaches during his journey was just mind-blowing, and it was really rich information. And we talked a lot about when these Zoom calls, it could range anything from technical to tactical, to the culture of an organization, or the culture of basketball in Finland, for example, the culture of basketball in Australia, some culture of basketball in Israel, and into some of the other components like the social and emotional factors that go into our job as coaches every day. So that's pretty much a background as to why I started doing these Zoom calls and who we involved in these Zoom calls, and then what we talked about. And the last thing I'll say about this element before I move on to the next slide is it's incredibly refreshing and really endearing how much people gave and how open coaches were. When I say coaches, I mean the players, psychologists, assistant coaches. It really, really was like heartfelt to experience how much people are willing to share. And I think we spend a lot of time as coaches, I know we do in this country, complaining that there's not enough CPD, there's not enough coaching clinics. But I feel like during the past 18 months, I probably had a coaching clinic every week. I felt like I was having one a week. And it wasn't a case of just watching a YouTube coaching clinic video. It was very much an interaction, an engagement, a relationship where I would ask questions that were specific to me at that time. Like we had a coach from the ACB on, and he talked to us a lot about the details of next defense, that element of jump switching, certain actions on defense. And he went inside great detail with the board and, you know, told us how teams were attacking it and exposing them with that stuff. And you can't get that from a YouTube clinic. And I felt like with Zoom, it's just opened up a whole new world that I want to go down. And that was the beauty of it. And that's the beauty of still doing it. Like it's still alive during this time period, probably more than ever. But I just want to, if you don't mind, guys, I really want to pay it forwards, you know, to the people on this screen and just say thank you. And you know, I'll end the presentation with this exact same slide. And if the listeners don't mind, I would just like to take 60 seconds to read off the names and just say a sincere thank you to Ross McMains, Liam Flynn, Len Bush, Lloyd Gardner, AJ Carr, Joe Mantegna, Gonzalo Rodriguez, Nenad Trunich, Simon Turner, Bill Bezic, Ryan Pannone, Daniel Sokolovsky, Stephen Rolnick, David Love, Mark Bennett, Jacob Round, Mike Sespel, Vlad Andruskovic, Hannah Matola, Billy Mims, Mark Jarm, JP Newburn, Kieran Achara, Alex Arama, Craig Nickel, Matt McKillop, feel like I'm back being a teacher, Ian McLeod, Mike McKay, Sergio Lara, Dave Titmus, Chris Oliver, Warwick Can, Francesco Nani, Jesse Sazend, Paul Kelleher, Colin Cronin, Carl Wheatle, Jamie O'Loughlin, Joe Prunty, Troy Cully, Damien Jennings, Christina Stankucha, Frank Batumba, Gary Maitland, Sam Nessum, and Zico Cornell. A sincere thank you to you guys, because everything I'm going to share today has got nothing to do with my thoughts on basketball. It's got everything to do with the stuff I've stole from these guys. Now, the reality is this. I realized very quickly when I was putting this presentation together. When Layson reached out to me not too long ago, and I submitted the topic, I was thinking this would be a great topic to do, because I can just share all the things I took for free. And just because of the good nature of people and their willingness to give, I can take all that and shine a light on it. And it's been really, really rich stuff. But as I was putting this presentation together, I quickly realized there's no possible way I can do every single person on that list justice as to what they gave me, because we'd probably need 2 weeks of a clinic to share, maybe more, to share the rich information, the quantity and the quality of what they gave. So what I've done today is, and there's no priority list here. I didn't pick a logical order process of what I was going to share. I just went through all my notes and I thought, let me pick a bit from there and a bit from here. So what I've done for this presentation is I've narrowed it down to these topics. So again, I'm going to share with people who are listening in, discussions I've had with other coaches about timeouts, player huddles, post play, post defense, on-ball defense, the best of coaching, the worst of coaching from what a performance director has seen, coaching pro players from the perspective of a pro coach and a performance director, environments, climate control, national team development, and coach development. So I've just picked these 12 topics and I thought, you know what, I'll be able to manage to share something on these topics with people. And again, I want to be very clear that, you know, there was no priority in why I chose what I chose. I just thought this could be good stuff to share. I could probably do 12 of these clinics and get through 50% of the information that I acquired from these guys. But I'm going to start off with timeouts. And what I want to share with you guys is just the perspective, what I thought was a bit of a unique perspective from a coach who from a coach who has a lot of experience coaching at the highest level. He also has a lot of experience from supporting coaches. So as a performance director, as a mentor, as a coach developer, he's got a world of experience. And when I asked him on the Zoom call, I was asking him, look, what's your thoughts on timeouts? Because at the time I was struggling thinking, right, am I calling the timeout at the right time? And am I maximizing these timeouts that I'm calling in a game? So when I had the conversation with him, you know, we talked about when was the best time to call a timeout. And his response was very simple. The moment you get the feeling to call a timeout, he said, is probably the best time to call a timeout. And, you know, he talked a lot about the break point in the game, you know, and the break point normally is the feeling that you get when you get the urge to take a timeout. And he said, and the other thing he highlighted from watching, from his own experiences and from supporting other coaches at a high level, he said normally, you know, he found coaches that are waiting too long. And, you know, after the game, he heard a lot of, oh, I wish I called a timeout at this time, or I wish I called a timeout at that time. And very often that time frame was a lot sooner than actually when they call a timeout. And why is that then? You know, the conversation I was having with him was, well, why do you think that is? Why are coaches waiting too long? Like, why am I waiting too long sometimes? And I could relate to all that. And the response was simple. And the response was something that resonated with me because it's a feeling I had, that we as coaches wait for the players to react before we call a timeout. We're waiting for the players to fix the moment in the game or to fix the break point in the game. Now that very much conflicts with my philosophy of coaching at the moment, because my philosophy of coaching at the moment, if anybody's on here listens to a previous clinic I've done, I talk a lot about letting players self-manage. And now there's a conundrum I have at the moment is, well, when is the right time? Because my break point, what I perceive as a break point and what another coach perceives as a break point could be very different. For me, it's probably leaving the players a little bit longer to see can they solve it. For me, the break point isn't the moment that something goes wrong. The break point for me is when something goes wrong and I've given the players an opportunity to see can they self-manage and they're not self-managing, then that's where I get to my break point, and that becomes my urge to call a timeout right now. He was also very adamant that coaches should be using all timeouts. Like he said, he didn't like to see any team go into the change room at halftime and the box score say that they had one timeout remaining, or you get to the end of the game and you had one or two timeouts remaining. He said he felt it was a bad sign, felt that there are precious moments that all coaches could be using. And the other thing is, like, what do you talk about in the timeouts, you know? And he said, like, a lot of the time he felt when he was observing and supporting coaches, the time was being wasted. You know, it was a lot of talking about describing what's happened and not necessarily focusing on what could you do now to affect the game plan. He had a unique perspective also. He had a very unique perspective on player huddles. So now if you go back to the athlete-centered approach to coaching, which I am a big advocate of and prophesize a lot, we embrace player huddles a lot. And it's something I would emphasize a lot. And he challenged me on that by saying, which didn't mean I was doing wrong or he was right. It's just all considerations. It's coaches' discussions. He said to me, do you have the players to have effective huddles on the court? Do you have the talent level for that? And I said, what do you mean? He said, do you know what they're talking about? Do they have the right solution, for example? And his message was, it's great that they have these huddles, but you need to be crystal clear what they're talking about. And does it synergize with what you want them to do on the court? I just thought that was a really interesting perspective. And the last thing he talked about, and he asked me, he said, how do you measure the effectiveness of your timeout? And it really got me thinking about how are we as coaches measuring the value or the impact of that break in play. So we make a decision as coaches to go to the table, call a timeout. What happens in the next few minutes after that timeout? And I've had this conversation with loads of coaches, and I'm really interested to actually take a deeper dive into it. And I tried to do it in previous seasons, but I just don't think I did it well enough. You know, I would get my assistant coaches to actually track what happened the next 3 or 4 minutes, 2 or 3 minutes after that timeout, based on what we talked about in the timeout. I think it's just a really interesting. So there are some things that he talked about in terms of timeouts that kind of grabbed my attention. I'm going to move on. Same coach, same conversation, same phone call. We talked about post play, and I brought it up because as a national team coach for Great Britain, playing in Division A European Championship, we were having a lot of problems defending the low post. And we started the conversation, well, he started the conversation by talking about, what do you see when you see a big guy walk in the gym? And I was thrown by the question. I didn't understand where he was going with it. He said, well, what do you notice most? And I said, I noticed the size, the height, the wingspan. And he said to me, you're focusing on the wrong things. He said, you should be focusing on their legs. And when he explained it and unboxed it a bit more, it made perfect sense. And he talked about, when a post player is good, when you have a good post player, what is the first thing they're doing? And he went on to explore that, well, they're establishing position. So now you're talking about footwork. So he said, the key is right now, he said, you guys are not as bad in the low post as you think you are, because you have physically strong players. Now there's other dynamics and other issues with that's going to make our bigs play like a Serbian big. So let's not go there. That's a rabbit hole of a conversation. But his message was, the key for big players' development, first of all, he talked about the physical, like improving leg strength and improving footwork. And his message was very simple and very straightforward. If you can't establish position, then you cannot receive the ball. And that kind of stuck with me a little bit, because I was thinking about our guys going, right, we have physically strong players. Maybe we need to put more of a focus on them establishing position as opposed to critiquing their ability to finish. So can we put them in a better position to catch the ball so their ability to finish goes up? And it just got me thinking in different ways about, what do I perceive when I'm recognizing a post player, or as a coach now, when I'm recruiting players for next year for our pro team. It's a second division pro team, which is not the highest level in our country, but we still get to recruit pro players. And I'll be recruiting a center and hopefully a low post scorer for next season. But it just got me thinking about the things I should be looking at first and foremost if I was to make a critical checklist. So anyway, we went on to the conversation to talk about post defense. And as I said at the start of this segment of the conversation, I said to him, look, we're undersized. We're having problems in the low post. And he said to me, well, you had big problems last year defending Serbia in the low post because they're very experienced. Those players are really experienced. And when you double them, you're going to have problems because the big player is looking for the assist and the perimeter players are effectively cutting. But he said against less experienced teams, he said you will find a lot more success with doubling the low post. So he actually, he advised that we would have better success at European Championship level under 18, under 20. We would have better success if we just fronted the low post and not doubled, but put a hyper emphasis on pressuring the pass. So again, he's talking about the solution is not necessarily what you're doing with the guy in the post. The solution for better post defense for us, he was recommending, was actually put more, if not all, of your focus on defending the ball and not allowing the ball to certain areas of the floor. For example, in hindsight, played Serbia, we got killed on high-low passes all day long. We didn't do a great job of preventing the ball to getting to the high post. We didn't do a great job of pressuring the ball when it was in the high post or on the 45. We didn't do a great job of keeping the ball off the 45 to take away the entry pass. So with this type of a conversation, he just got my mind thinking in a different way about defending the low post. Not a different way, but actually prioritizing maybe a different way, because we would always talk about defending the pass or defending where it's coming from. But I can't say it was number one on a critical checklist. What was number one was actually how we're going to manipulate the guy in the low post, his position. Are we doubling on the catch, on the dribble, on the second dribble? Are we fronting early, high and loose and fronting early? Are we forcing baseline? So we would spend a lot of time prioritizing that, but he got us to think in a different way, which I found interesting. He gave me a scenario. He said, if you've got 1v1 in the high post, so now we're talking about a high-low situation, and the ball goes above the player's head. He takes the ball above the head to make the pass. He said, think like this. You have two options. When you're defending the passer from the high post, you have two choices. One, you can jump off the passer and just flood the paint, just dive down into the low post. And now you put that passer in a position to shoot or to drive one-on-one into traffic, which he didn't plan for. Ball goes above the head, he's planning for the pass. Excuse me. Option two, he said, you can consider putting a short, stronger player to defend the low post. What advantage will that give you? A short, stronger player will fight a lot, like a guard. will fight, be aggressive in the low post, and not only fight and be aggressive, but get away with contact because of the size disparity, more so than a bigger player. And what was interesting, he said, you might find that you are playing faster. Okay, style of game we wanted to play as a Great Britain national team at Euros was an aggressive pace and space, score in the first 8 seconds of the shot clock type game. Somewhat similar to Finland, actually, in terms of how they built their program. And he said, if you put a guard on the low post player, where is your low post? Where is your center at this moment in time? Probably defending the high post. And he said, this in transition, your center, your big player, can be first guy down the floor, which means he is alone or behind the defense, or he has a mismatch. And again, it was just another thought, another angle on thinking about, we're going to get killed in the low post, but how can we use it to our advantage? We're going to have problems in the low post, but how can we use it to our advantage? And the last two things he said about this was, doubling in the low post is a tactic for a moment. It's not for a game. So, to go in there with the game plan that we're going to double the low post on the first dribble, gives the players the message we're doing it every time. And, he was he strongly stated that it's not for the game, it's more of a tactic. And obviously you give up a balance in rebounds, there's obviously you give up the advantage to give up more offensive rebounds because of doubling in the low post. Same coach. We talked a lot. I think we connected 2 or 3 times on a Zoom call with him, but he spoke also somewhat. I'm trying to share maybe stuff that's less traditional in one way, or some of the things he said that were maybe not so common. And, when we talked about on-ball defense, he flipped it. He actually said, let's talk about on-ball defense, but let's begin that conversation. What the player who ends up defending the ball, what is that player doing before they arrive to defend the ball? So in other words, what is that player doing with their position away from the ball? So on one hand, I guess he was talking about anticipation. Like, what are you doing now that's going to put you in a better position to play on-ball defense when the ball comes to your guy? And a lot of things and he's talking about, look, you can control your on-ball defense. You can control that moment better if you're preparing for it before the moment comes. And obviously he talked about the closeout and it being the most important and challenging thing. But his main point of emphasis was, you can play better on-ball defense if you have better off-ball defensive position. And obviously closing out on balance are the first steps in terms of being a better on-ball defensive player. The other thing which really grabbed my attention was the word responsibility when defending the ball one-on-one. So, a lot of coaches and even myself, we talk about no middle, force baseline, force to checkpoints on the floor. And his response to that was, when you direct the ball to one area, you are ultimately passing the responsibility to somebody on defense who must rotate. So for example, sometimes the concept is, coaches are forcing the ball to the weak hand. Coaches are forcing ball to the middle. Coaches are forcing ball to the baseline, sideline. And his message was, with this mindset, you were actually passing the responsibility to somebody else. So his whole theory and principle concepts about on-ball defense was, it is the responsibility of the guy in front of the ball. And to do this, he prophesied a lot on keeping the chest in front of the ball. So if the ball is on the offensive player's right hip, then you are shifting your body over and your chest needs to be between the ball and the basket. If the ball is changing to the other hip, you're moving the body across. So the chest is always between the ball, chest is always between the ball and the basket. Now, I went and coached on-ball defense that way for a period of time. And it is incredibly tough for the players to be good with that. Now, I stuck with it for a couple of years, and a couple of our guards really flourished with it, but they were incredibly quick laterally. So they were able to control the ball. But this is very much connected to the use of the hands. So the style of on-ball defense he was talking about is very much an aggressive style where you are controlling the offense, you are controlling the game, you are controlling the rhythm, the tempo of the game with your defense, but it took a certain type of player to be able to do that. Now I found out the hard way that you can't do that with all your guys. So for us this past summer, we had a guard called Chris Feeney and David Chive. I had no problem with them with this principle: chest between ball and basket, aggressive with the hands. But with other players, we couldn't put them in that situation because they just weren't ready. So there were some points of emphasis with on-ball defense from this coach. I'm going to switch coaches now. I'm going to switch Zoom calls. So the next two slides was the Zoom call about, I think maybe 6 to 8 months ago. And it was with an ex-pro coach. He hasn't coached in a while now. He's been a national teams director around the world, different countries. And he's been a coach, mentor, coach, support developer for quite a few years. And you're talking about somebody who's worked in environments all the way from grassroots national teams, pathways, right up to Olympic coaches, Olympic teams. And, you know, not just coaching those teams, but actually supporting the coaches of those teams. And, you know, on this call, we asked him, what were the best things that you've seen from coaches, like holistically? It was such a horrible question. And I say that for one reason. We were asking him to categorize the best he's seen from coaches and the worst he's seen from coaches. And he's been working with coaches who coach under 16s national team all the way through to coaches who are coaching in the Olympics and coaching in the highest pro leagues in the world. So we narrowed it down to, you know, a certain age range. And we said, okay, in the different countries you've been in, what are the common trends you've seen from the best under 16 national team coaches right through to under 20s? So that cadet age that we say in Europe. So 16s, 18s, 20s, men, male and female. What's the best things that you've seen from those coaches? And what are the worst? He said the best always had a great ability to teach, ability to connect with their words, communicated exceptionally well. Actually, he said, ironically, not ironically, he said somewhat controversially, they were able to demonstrate, which we're not all able to do. But he said the best coaches he saw really had a knack for teaching and were able to transfer the knowledge that was in their head, came out of their mouth, into the mindset of another player so they could bring it to life. He said there was a unique skill set, and the best always had it. He said, like, you know, what he recognized is the better coaches asked more questions and kind of guided the players to finding solutions. And that was quite refreshing to hear because it's a philosophy I advocate quite a lot. And I'm butchering it and tearing it apart at the moment, but I'm definitely getting better at it year to year, but I'm still nowhere near what I want to be with that. And I asked him for specific coaches who I can observe with this style of coaching, and he shared a bunch of guys, and it was really refreshing to watch them in action. And he said, you've got to be very wary of players that constantly say, yes, coach, no coach, yes, coach, no coach. From his perspective, he felt that's not a healthy sign, because he felt that's not exposing, that is giving you the telltale signs that player, the only voice that player has is a compliant voice to the coach. And he talked a lot about the best coaches were collaborative with their players. It was a lot about asking questions, a lot about guiding them to problem solve themselves, but also in control of the team. And he said technical ability to coach the technical details was huge. I'm going to share with you what he calls a coach education house. And I really like this because I think it's pretty simple to follow and pretty easy to understand. And his coach education house is basically 4 rooms. So you've got the technical, tactical, physical, mental. But he said leadership is like a roof on top of the house. And coaches, he felt, needed to be very aware of all 4 rooms and very competent at teaching and delivering all 4 rooms. But without the roof, the rooms get flooded in effect. So you can't live in the house. So developing the leadership skills became the most critical thing for him. And he said what he found is with coaches, you know, when the tactic breaks down, you know, ask yourself the question, is it a technical issue? And if it's a technical issue, then you have to go down the chain. Is it a physical issue? And his thoughts were too many coaches live in one of these rooms, particularly the tactical. And I can relate to that actually, because I feel one of my weaknesses as a coach, no question, is the physical competency I have to coach players physically. And I really want to, for 2 years, I've been saying this right now, and I still haven't done it, but I do need to expand my knowledge on the physical development of a player to greater detail. But it was interesting for me that he felt, coaches living in one of these rooms too long and not enough in one of the other 4 rooms. And the coach education house and how I can perceive that and see that in my mind was a really interesting way to explain it. And then the last thing is the roof is the critical thing. Your relationships with players, your communication, how you engage them, how you connect to them. Are you willing to show vulnerability with and to the players, to model vulnerability? So yeah, that was really interesting. He also went on to tell me, when I asked him, of course, what were the worst things you saw in some of these coaches from the age of under 16 national team right through to under 20? And I put a picture of myself here. That's myself coaching about 6 or 7 years ago, national team under 16, I think at the time. And I ticked probably most of these boxes for sure. And maybe sometimes I still do, but the common trend he saw with the worst coaches were they were missing the critical element of leadership. And if I go back there and say to you, leadership was the relationship building, communication, modeling vulnerability and connection. And he said, the worst coaches, and I sorry to use the word worst coaches, the coaches needing most development were missing the element of leadership and knowledge of the game. So understanding the flow, the time to score, the situation, when to make a change, when to make a sub, when to call a timeout, like we talked about in the very first slide. And he said many had a barrier to having a philosophy of the game. And most coaches had a philosophy and a mindset of how they had been coached previously, which we've heard time and time again. And what went with that is a mindset of superiority. Like, I have all the answers and players don't need to ask me questions. And he said he saw a lot of time where players were actually afraid to ask questions. You could see that. And again, the last 2 things where there's too much talking by the coaches. I feel like I'm doing it right now in this presentation, but I guess I'm talking to a screen. But there was too much talking by coaches and too much dictatorship and not enough questioning. And the last point there I thought was brilliant. Like, many coaches coach based on their personality. That's a bit of a conundrum actually, because I'd like to think that we should be coaching based on our personality. But that means we'd have to be a good person and have all those traits. So I guess that's a massive conundrum, really, and a different talking point, a different discussion, really. The same coach, the same ex-coach and coach, mentor, performance director, when I asked him about coaching pro players, I guess at the time I was probably going into my 2nd year as a full-time, as a professional coach, coaching pro players, be it 6 or 7 in our squad. And I guess that, at the time, it probably provoked some questions. How can I coach these guys better? And he shared with me, like, the things with pros that he discovered is, in his time, is that they will outlast the coach very often. And if you don't recruit and bring in good guys, you're going to have a rough ride, basically. And the other thing he said, you need to be very mindful of their needs. Their needs are different, as opposed to coaching a junior team where you can probably categorize and kind of put them in certain categories and stuff of how to manage them. He said, like, the needs of a pro player are very different. They're used to working hard. They're mature, and they're used to knowing what to do. And one of the most important things is you got to tell them when there's time off. Give them that schedule ahead of time. Don't upset them by keeping it and them not knowing what's lying ahead. And he said the other thing was about if you're working, which we are, if you're working with a club that has limited budgets, pros have an acceptable baseline level of standards. And he explained to me that could be really hard for you to manage with a limited budget. And if you have a limited budget, his advice was invest more with the welfare stuff. Like I just said there, in terms of medical and strength and conditioning provisions. It's something as simple as having enough tape, ice after the games, ice baths if you can provide it. Have the provisions that the players will feel like they're looked after. So that was some of the things. And again, I'll finish it off by saying, like, he told me, look, take a good person, good player, rather than a bad person and a great player. And he talked a lot about the system needs to do what's best for the system. And I guess as a young coach who was starting to recruit pro players 2 years ago, or as an assistant 4 years ago, you know, I probably looked past the bad attitude because they could help us win. And I have found out the hard way that that is not the way to go. And everybody's looking for the great person and great player. So a limited budget can be a big barrier to that one. But he shared something about Argentina, which I thought was interesting. And I need to dig a little bit deeper. And there might be somebody on the call that knows more about this than me. But he related culture to what Argentina did, you know, about culture is building for the future. And, you know, when Argentina had that, you know, they cleared shop and brought in all the young guys, cleared the decks, as he said, you know, and sometimes you need to be ready to do that. And so again, what the message here from him was, your culture will always trump individuals. So the next one I'm going to move on to is somebody who's not a coach, who was a coach actually, coached basketball at a very high level, but actually spent the last 30 years working as a sports psychologist in high performance environments. So what do I mean by high performance environments? He's worked with international football, World Cup football, Premiership football here in the UK, World Cup rugby teams, NCAA, and he's worked with the best of the best you could possibly work with. And for me to call this guy up and say, or message him, reach out to him and say, can you give us an hour of your time so we can pick your brain? On one hand, I felt a bit cheeky doing it, and I was kind of hesitant to do it, but I thought, let's just go for it and see what happens. And for him to turn around and give us, like, ended up being 2 hours. Like, I thought it was absolutely mind-blowing, because you can imagine how busy this guy is, but just an incredibly humbling, giving person. And he talked a lot about climate control within environments. So I'm talking about the environments that we practice in, we play in, we perform in. And when he talked about climate control, what he meant by that was like the opposite to an environment where everything is prescribed and there's command, and I'm the boss and you do as I say and players didn't really have a voice or a choice in that one. So climate control in a nutshell was setting a framework for athletes, and setting a framework where athletes can flourish. In what way? They can flourish with how they think, how they act, what they say, how they behave. And it's all done through their performance. So as the third point says here, and sorry to read off the screen, he wanted athletes to think like we have to create, his message was, we have to create environments where athletes are self-managing, they're thinking and not just performing, not just doing. Excuse me. He said, like, that type of an environment will get more out of your players. Now, the other thing he highlighted, it may not get more out of your players, or you may not get more wins and see those outcomes immediately, but over the player's long term, over that player's career, they are going to become better decision makers, better at self-managing on the court, off the court, better at making effective choices. And he talked a lot about, as well as us as coaches, standing back, like step back, scan, watch them, let them perform. Let them get it wrong. Like, you know, put scenarios in where they have to make decisions, put scenarios in your session where it's difficult for them to solve the problem, and then let them solve it, just step away. The other thing I like that he talked about, I really like this one, because I think one of the best things I've done is actually get this right with some players. I've got it wrong with others. But he said with new players, and for me that was very prevalent because we get new players in the national team every summer that I don't coach during the year. He said with new players, be very wary of labels. What does he mean by labels? Be very wary of what other people will tell you about these players that they've worked with who are now coming to you. But get to understand their background, get to know that player's background, get to know how that player has been previously coached. What type of coach has that player had up to this point that they come to you? What kind of needs do they have? Are they living a distance from practice? Is there problems at home? You know, find out what's going on in their world. Because when you do all that, he said, you can go to new depths of this person's world and potentially explore talents that nobody ever saw in them. And, you know, he wasn't the first person to say this to me. Mark Bennett was the first person to say this to me. Mark was telling me this 8, 9 years ago. And, you know, this guy that I'm talking about right now on the screen, this world-renowned sports psychologist that I'm sharing the information from the phone call, he said the same thing. He said, like, you can, and I thought that's a great way for me to think. Let me not take on board what this previous coach said, or actually, let me take on board what this previous coach has said about this player, but let that not be my definition of this player. Let me find out for myself. And that's worked really well for me, actually, over the past few years in certain ways, for sure. He also talked about us as coaches needing to we need to have adult to adult conversations. And he felt there's too many environments out there at a high level where it's very much an adult to a child system of dialogue. Like, as coaches, we're talking down to players. Now, that the adult to adult conversation doesn't have to be just alive in an adult environment. If I'm coaching an under 14, I would obviously change the terminology, but an adult to adult conversation would be me meeting them where they're at. So having a conversation with a 14-year-old where I'm actually willing to listen and to embrace what they say. And I'm willing to speak to them on a level they understand and not speak to them emotionally or speak down to them. So adult to adult conversations was a big part of what he shared with us in terms of start your conversation with a player where you're building a framework around the athlete, where you're building a framework around the athlete. And on the second to last point here, he shared some of the phrases that are good connecting phrases to a volatile player, to a player that you're finding hard to manage, to a player who's not giving their best. Simply ask them, what gets the best out of you, and what can I do to get you to play to your best? So again, you're meeting them where they're at. You're speaking to them with a genuine, authentic desire to help them as players in the world that they're currently in, which is performance sports. And I love this last point he made. Adaptation trumps philosophy. And he talked about, we have to have a philosophy as coaches, as a club, as a team. But the ability to adapt your philosophy based on the context and something that's happening, he says, is one of the biggest strengths that we can have as coaches. Last few things from this world-renowned sports psychologist, as I term him, and he is. You know, what gets in the way of performance? That's another thing he shared with us. Like, what gets in the way of performance? And, you know, a lot of it's to do with attitude and character, and that's nothing mind-blowing. We all know that. But how can we shape it? And we got into a deep conversation. I can't recall the details now, but it was a lot to do what I said on the previous slide. Like, have adult to adult conversations and start by building a framework around the athletes. And even that player who's difficult to manage, like, approach them with, like, what can I do to help you? What can I do for you to play at your best? What gets the best out of you? Involving them in the discussion. Second point here is the misrepresentation of toughness. And, you know, he shared a lot about that. Unfortunately, it's a public perception for many that if we shout at players, if we shout at them, they play harder and they become tougher. So he asked me, what did I think about that? And I said, yeah, I think, you know, it does happen. Like, I want to argue against it. I want to say it's wrong. But I said, the reality is I've come out of changing rooms at halftime, having laid into the players, and they've performed better in the first 5 minutes of the third quarter. And I want to say that doesn't work, because I don't like coaching that way, and I don't truly believe in that way or the value of that way long term. So then he said to me, he said, what happens when you stop shouting then? If you shouting at them makes them tougher, when you're not shouting at them, do they go back to being weak? And that kind of made a penny drop for me, going, okay, that's interesting perspective. And then he backed it up by saying, like, you know, just because you're shouting and coaching aggressively, let's say, it doesn't mean they've changed. They're not doing it for them. They're doing it for you. And his whole thing was, until they're doing it for themselves, self-managing, they're never going to truly reach their potential. So he was asking me, like, how are you going to coach in a game that you've described to me? He said, how are you going to go into that change room at halftime, not shout at them, and still get them to perform at their best at the start of the third period? And then he defined toughness as disciplined thinking in action under pressure and fatigue. I'll repeat that again because I think it's a really good definition. Toughness is disciplined thinking in action under pressure and fatigue. Last few things from this great guy. Story, he told me that when he was younger, before he became a sports psychologist, while he was still in his coaching domain and trying to be a great coach and trying to move up the ladder, he said he sent, and this is going back quite a while, about 30 years or more, maybe more, probably more actually. He said he sent 100 letters to colleges in the States. And he said he got four replies. And those letters were, can he come and visit? Can he come and can he sit in the practice venue and watch them practice and sit behind the bench and watch the games and just be a fly on the wall? 4 replies. And he went over there, you know, he paid his own way, stayed in hotels, this, that, and the other, just for some professional development. Brilliant stuff. And he said he watched the practices and he watched the games, and there was a big disparity with one coach. And I won't name the 2 coaches, but he said he observed 2 coaches who we all know. Every coach on this call will know these 2 guys. I think they're retired now, actually. And he said, you know, in the practice, they were both outstanding. They were really calm, really, really intense, but calm. Like the practice was really important, as you can imagine. But he said as soon as he watched the games, one of the coaches was just went nuts because he got hung up on the scoreboard. Never took his eyes off the scoreboard. Everything he said to the players was relating to the scoreboard. And he said the second coach, the other coach he observed, same level, same league, same conference, he said he didn't reference the scoreboard once and didn't coach according to the scoreboard until the last 4 minutes of the game. And he said he basically helped the players win the game in the last 4 minutes when things had to be tightened up. And, you know, so I just thought that was an interesting perspective he shared with us. A couple of other things he shared real quick. Olympic gold medalist was getting out of the pool. He shared this was somebody he was mentoring and supporting. He'd won his gold medal at the Olympics. He was getting out of the pool. Reporter ran over to him, and the reporter said to him, "What are you thinking?" And the swimmer's response was, and we'd probably all know who the swimmer is as well. The swimmer's response was, "I'm thinking about what's next." And what this sports psychologist was saying to me, that's the mentality of a winner. Now, we might look at that and think that's extreme. You've just won a gold medal, celebrate it, enjoy it. But he said that swimmer, all he was thinking about is, great, now what's next? And I thought it was a really interesting story. I quite like it a lot. Actually, it reminds me of probably Jordan, actually, when you're watching The Last Dance at the moment and getting that insight. The last thing, which was great, and I think this is a really rich thing to share with people. He said the best coaches are people catchers. And I believe that he observed this, or he gave the example from German football. And he said what he meant by people catchers is, I'll just describe it actually, the 4 rules. You need to make people feel needed, cared for, listened, and appreciated. So he said great coaches are what he defines as people catchers. They make people feel needed. They make people feel cared for. They make you feel like you're listened to, and they make you feel appreciated. And he was explaining that, like, you as coaches, all you want to do is players to fully commit, go for it, give it 100%. But he said to give it 100%, they will only do that. They will only go there consistently if they know that you care, listen, appreciate, and they feel needed by you. And he calls it a wraparound culture. So we're just wrapping the athletes in these feelings, I guess. And then he asked me, he said, can you tell me 5 ways that you meet each of these 4 rules? And it just blew me away because it really put me in the spot. But I've gone away and I've thought about it. Can I think of 5 ways I've cared for my players, listened to my players, appreciated them, and made them feel needed? And it was a really interesting task to do, actually. Okay, next one. Again, I think I'm only going to share 2 more, guys, and then I'm going to do kind of a wrap up. Of what I took from other people, kind of a quick hit around, let's say. But this one was a conversation with an ex-NBA player who became a performance director, coach, mentor, coach support. And him and his predecessor took a small European nation who had just aspirations to be in FIBA tournaments. He helped take that nation on to be potential medalists at tournaments every time they go there. And, you know, even their under 17 team, like, got to the world championships, under 17s, under 19s. You know, most years in Division A, they could be knocking on a door of a medal, which is incredible, because when I look at this nation and that country, it was probably on a par with where we were 10 years ago. And even though we're rising, they have gone, boom, they've shot through the roof in comparison. And I asked them on the call, I called them up again, massively grateful for this man to give me an hour, 2 hours of his time. And he's given me plenty of time since as well. But I asked him, like, how did you guys make it work? How did you guys go from being that nation who's happy to be in a FIBA tournament to actually, you know, being on a podium, winning medals at a FIBA tournament? And he said that basically, to make a long story short, like, you know, I just wanted to be clear with everybody who's listening in. I'm giving you a snapshot basically of one conversation every time I take you through a different coach. It's basically a snapshot. It would be too much to share everything. But he said they limited what they did. So in terms of what they would do on the court, style of game, they committed to doing less but doing it better. And the biggest part as well was they modeled it from the seniors down. So it was a bit of a top-down approach. You know, they really, you know, invested a lot in the senior team, made that team really important, made them successful. So it would have a trigger-down effect to the junior teams. And the other thing that really, really is refreshing to hear is the synergy. He said there was incredible synergy between all their national teams, from cadets to seniors, male, female, but also the club coaches in the country, you know, bought into the system. They bought into the areas of emphasis. They bought into whatever the federation was prescribing as this is the way we're going to go forwards. And that unity and that synergy of a country coming together, it didn't take long for them to see the benefits. And it was they're really a great example and a really good blueprint of how you can grow the game and how you can impact performance in a short period of time when everybody comes together and you have clear leadership. When it came to selecting players, I asked them regarding style of game, what are you looking for? When you select the players, what are you looking for? What's your critical checklist? What's number one on the list? And he said it's defense. Like, they have to select players for the European Championships based on defense first, because I think he talked about they don't have as many players as a European powerhouse, or they don't have a culture or as much experience as a Spain, Italy, France, Serbia, Turkey, Israel. So a bit like us, actually, GB team, if we're going to be successful at the Euros, it's mostly going to be because of our defense more than our offense. And he said to me, they would never select a guard who couldn't be a great defensive player. That had to be the number one criteria. And I just thought that was really interesting. He unpicked it and went a lot deeper than that, but that point stood out to me most because I guess I connected to it with how we are here in Great Britain. And then they talked about coach development. In 2007, they changed the way that they educated coaches. Everybody had to adapt what they called our way of how to do things on and off the court. Now, on the court was easy. We're going to work on X, Y, and Z, and we're going to roll that out in all clubs. All national teams are going to emphasize that stuff. But he said they put a big emphasis on what they do off the court. So diet, nutrition, strength and conditioning, relationships, connections, communities of practice. It was very much a national driven program as opposed to clubs driving different things, different ways. And the other interesting one was all their national team coaches, he said, have degrees in teaching also, which I thought was incredibly interesting because obviously an ability to teach being the number one criteria for them to have an effective coach. But they put a massive emphasis on the coaching development because they felt they don't have as many players as European powerhouses, as I've said in this slide here. Okay, where are we? Right, last slide from me, guys. I'm not aware of the time. So, okay, there we go. Sorry for that. I can see I've been on 55 minutes, I think it is, Coach, but I'll just continue anyway.
Yeah, Coach, you're good. We're okay if we go a little bit long as well.
Super, mate, super. Well, this is the last slide anyway, but I'm happy to take questions and I'm happy to unpick some of the stuff I've talked about a little bit deeper, should anybody want to. But I'll finish with this slide in terms of a presentation. I'll finish with this slide. And, you know, if you on all these Zoom calls, like, you know, some of the questions can be quite common and transfer to each conversation. And one of the questions I find myself asking, especially performance directors or players, actually, there's a great one. I asked them what's the top three elements that make a great coach, be it from your experience as a player, be it from your experience as a head coach, assistant coach, be it from your experience as a performance director or a coach mentor. What's the three components? And if you look across the screen there, you know, I asked, these are 6 examples. Is it 6? These are 6 examples. One from an ex-pro player who played in the Olympics, so played to the highest level. Another one from a European coach that that coaches in the continent, very high level. One from a coach developer. And actually this coach developer might be one of the most stimulating people for me to talk to. This coach developer is Mike McKay. You know, I can say that. And Mike McKay is somebody I think you guys are going to have on. Actually, a lot of the people I've connected with, you guys are going to have on, which is awesome, or quite a few, should I say. Another one was from another pro European coach, another pro player who plays overseas, and another overseas pro coach as well. So let's unbox this a little bit. The ex-player who played in the Olympics said the top 3 elements that he experienced when he was playing from a coach was, number 1, a coach who cared, had the ability to teach, and empowered players. And I asked him to unbox that one a little bit. I said, okay, well, what do you mean by empower players? He told you guys could make choices, and he told you guys, or how did that look? And he said, we just felt that he was interested in us as people. And he said, you can always tell, this ex-player I got a lot from. He said, you can always tell when a coach is genuine, and that's his true personality. Like, he's genuinely curious about what your thoughts are on this. And he said, but you can also tell when a coach is ticking a box. And he said, you know, he's had both, but there were the 3 things that stood out to him. And the word caring actually really kind of struck me as, wow, I didn't expect that. And I don't know why I didn't expect that. That could be telling you more about me. But caring was an interesting one. Pro coach, the second one was credibility, which I found interesting because that gives a different perspective. I guess credibility with the players is what he meant. Credibility in terms of they have to respect you. Yeah, I remember this one now, actually. It was, they don't have to like you. You're not there to be their best friend, was his thoughts, but you have to have credibility with the players. They have to respect you and know that you can help them. The other one was adaptable. And I think that these are pretty much common sense. All these, like adaptable and knowledgeable, you know, are ones that I think the more you coach, the more you realize I've got to be adaptable to what, you know, I plan to do. I've got to be adaptable to different contexts, different situations. Mike McKay, I hope Mike doesn't mind me. Actually, he's the one name I have said. And I'm saying Mike McKay is because the respect I have for him, and, you know, the amount of stuff that Mike has shared with me and how he's provoked and challenged my thoughts has been fantastic. But Mike said an ability to make individuals better was one of the things that, you know, top 3 elements great coaches have. Also, an ability to make individuals work together. So how can you bring a team together? And the last one, which is brilliant, building dreams. Like, coaches will help people to dream to do bigger and better things. So again, motivational type of stuff. And in the bottom row, we're back to knowledge, caring, connection. And that came from a coach, a pro coach. Knowing the why, which is an interesting one. And we hear a lot about that, I guess, in the past few years. Like, you know, can you justify why you do what you do? Do you know the value of why you do what you do? Or my question always is, well, prove it. Show me, where's the evidence that you know the value of what you're doing and why you do what you do? And then the last 2, obviously, current pro player, he's looking for a coach who's got patience. He's looking for a coach that listens to players, that has a relationship with the person, not just the player. And I'll read that one again because I think that's interesting. A current pro player, 3 things he's looking for in a coach. He's looking for a coach who's patient. I guess poise under pressure is the big one there. When I spoke to him, he was like, I said, let's take a deeper dive into what patience looks like for you in terms of a coach. He said, like, when the game's on the line or when things are not going well, when I'm playing bad, you know, a coach who's not soft with me, but patient. and understands me, because this pro player said, "Coach, I'm never trying to get it wrong when I step on the court, but I am going to play poor." And he said, very often, in the past, I've had coaches that get angry about that. And he said, I never understood that because it wasn't my motive to play bad. And it's just an interesting point of view, isn't it, from a player when they say stuff like that. And then the last one is like, pro coach overseas, again, in the continent here in Europe. He said he thinks the top three things is coach has to be aspirational, has to have an ability to teach, and has to have an understanding of the player. So there's some of the things that from the Zoom calls that I've had just like a quick fire buzz around. So I'm going to put the last slide up again just to say thank you to all these guys and to the guys in the future who are coming up. I've got a great Zoom call coming up on Thursday with Stephen Rolnick, and Stephen Rolnick's name is here in the middle of that screen. Stephen Rolnick doesn't know anything about basketball. This is such a great example actually to talk about. Stephen Rolnick doesn't know anything about basketball, yet Stephen Rolnick has taught me more about coaching than all coaching courses I've been on. And he's taught me about connection, how to connect succinctly, quickly, efficiently with a player, and how to help guide them in a better direction, how to help me to get the player to initiate some change talk if necessary. I won't go into everything Stephen Rolnick does, but I think he's a great name that just stands out from that list, who has taught me how to be a better coach, yet he doesn't know the rules of basketball. Above him, Nenad Trunic. I mean, need I say any more? An absolute genius when it comes to the game, and the knowledge he shared has been brilliant. And there's some great names around the screen, from local coaches here like Lloyd Gardner, Len Bush, who've really jumped on a Zoom call here with me and just shared their thoughts, their philosophies, their concepts, their principles, what they believe about coaching. And it's been really rich. And I've taken something from all of them. So I just want to say a big thank you to you guys if your name is up on the screen right now. And I really appreciate the time that you've shared. All right, Coach, that's my presentation done. I'm happy to end it there or have a dialogue or questions if you want to follow up.
Coach, thanks so much, man. This is awesome stuff. Like you said, we probably could have set up a 2-week, clinic on just, these subjects. But these are some incredible insights. We do have a couple of questions. There's been a handful come up, and some of these are really good. So I'm gonna fire a couple of these at you real quick, if you don't mind.
Sure, mate. Go for it.
Alrighty. One of the first questions that was entered into the session here was specifically about kind of your thoughts or your take on how a coach's personality or demeanor to the person should affect their style of play or their desired system. If there should be, what your thoughts are in terms of coaches are different. How much should your individuality show through in your style of play or the way that you're coaching your team?
I think it's such an intriguing question. And I also think it's a really, really difficult question to answer for another person. And the reason I say that is, like, we as people are incredibly different and unique, and we all have different ways about us. My belief, and I'm not going to say what's right for that coach, but what's right for me is that, and I asked coaches this on the Zoom call, like, how much does your personality get reflected, or how much does your personality reflect in how you coach? Or if you remove the coach from you, where does that leave you? And now you're back to the person. And is there a disparity? Is there a difference between both? I will say this, I will answer the question by talking about this. For years, for a long time, I was always prophesizing that the best coaches and the best teachers, I used to prophesize the same thing when I was teaching, the best coaches are the best actors. That's what I used to prophesize. That's what I used to say to people. And I said it because I didn't know any different, and I truly believed it at the time. But right now, and this is what's right for me, it doesn't make it right for everybody else. What's right for me right now is actually coaching inside my personality, coaching like Alan Keane coaches, not like Brad Stevens coaches or Obradovich coaches. I want to coach with my personality. I want to coach with my uniqueness, with who I am. And I might adopt principles and concepts from many people. And I showed a lot of names on that screen who I've stolen from, but I'm still going to coach that concept, that principle, that drill. I'm going to coach it with my personality. And for me, there's comfort in that. I've become more comfortable as a coach when I've stayed true to who I am as a person when I'm coaching on the sideline. And I feel like I coach better and I'm at ease with myself. But I didn't always coach that way. I often coached how I used to be coached. I had a lot of good coaches when I was a younger player. Especially, we had a lot of American coaches came over to the league in Ireland, and I had some really good guys, really good coaches. But actually, when I look back on it, the best coach I had was the one who was coached to his personality. He coached the way he was as a person, and that's how I believe. That's my philosophy right now. And like I said to you, Coach, it doesn't make it right for everybody, but I like to think at the moment. I don't like to think. I know I coach my best when I coach inside my personality.
That's great. That's great stuff, Coach. I appreciate that. Got another one here. If you've got another minute or two,
You go.
this is coming.
No problem.
Okay, this is coming from a coach that's working on developing a youth program, essentially to prepare players for the next level. Sounds like probably we're talking about U14s, U12s maybe. And the coach is referencing when you were speaking about the national team program that had such immediate success with the Our Way approach. And the coach is basically asking, like, what are some of the most important elements to demand consistency on from players, you know, in scenarios like that where you're trying to generate a program. And then in the same breath, how much freedom would you allow your coaches to explore their own ideas in establishing, you know, that consistency?
Well, there's two parts to that question. I think in terms of the consistency, when you're looking for consistency, first of all, consistency of what? Like for me this year, these past few years, the only consistency I've been looking from our guys is a consistency with commitment. And commitment to what then is the next question. Well, that's the prerogative of the coach, I guess, or the environment, the team. What are you willing to commit to? And are they able to commit to what you're asking them to commit to? So we're back to, are you asking them to do what they're capable to do or what you want them to do as a coach? And I think you have to be very clear on that, because we very often critique players for not committing or not being consistent. But actually, if you rewind it all the way back and look and go and be honest with yourself about what you're asking them to do, it might be too much, and they may not be able to commit to that. They may not be able to be consistent with that. So that, for me, that's the first thing you have to unpick. What am I asking them to do, and do they have the capacity to do that? That's the first thing. In terms of now, if you stick with the under 14s, for me, it's the same thing. Under 14s, senior player, it doesn't matter. The principle is the same. If our players are lacking commitment or lacking consistency, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's a human behavior. We all do it. Coaches, every single one of us on this call has lacked commitment and consistency at some point in time, even in one season. What the support mechanism we put in place for those moments is, we call it resets. And we just have a conversation with the player, normally with video to back it up, about if there's a lack of consistency or commitment with things that we know they can do well because we've seen them do it before, then we're just at a reset moment. And how do you reset? Well, I've just talked about video. You involve video so they can see it, number one. And number two, which is the most important factor, you just reconnect them. But what do you reconnect them to? You reconnect them to what they said they wanted to do from day one. So we walk in the start of every season. All right, guys, who here wants to be the best player they possibly can be? Step over the line. Everybody steps over the line. If they're not, then you know where you stand with that person. You don't have to worry about consistency. You don't have to worry about commitment, because they are there to be a participant. They're not there to be a performer. But if you're with a group of under 14 players or a group of pro players, and their goal is to be the best player they can possibly be, and they've said that to you, they've entered basically a verbal contract that they are going to fully commit and give you the best version of themselves every single practice. Now they're human, so they're going to fall back on that. They're not going to nail it every single time. So us as coaches, our job is then to step in, reset them, sit down, watch some videos so they don't feel attacked, so they know exactly what we're talking about, what lack of commitment, lack of consistency looks like, and then just reconnect them to what they said they wanted to do when they came through the door on day one. And I find myself throughout the year, I coach an under-19 academy team, Performance Pathway in the UK during the season, and I also coach that semi-pro team during the season I talked about earlier. And I have to reconnect those guys all the time, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm perfectly fine. I know it's coming. We'll get to maybe everyone's motivated in August because it's preseason. Everyone's motivated mid-September because it's the first game. Everyone's motivated when you get into October because we might have played 2-1-2 or played 3-1-3 or played 3-1-2. Everyone's feeling fresh. But when you get to like November and it's snowing in the morning and it's cold and they got to come in for an area practice, you lack the commitment, you lack the consistency. They're the moments you got to reconnect. But can you preempt those moments ahead of time if you know they're coming? If you're an experienced coach, you know the stuff is coming. My question then to you would be, what have you done in preparation for this moment? So for me, to not prepare for the moment that's coming in November, we hope, would be wrong. I need to be ready. And what does that look like? It looks like me sniping and scanning for guys, right? Who's dropping off first, right? Got to nail them before they drop off too far. Reconnect them to what they agreed success looked like. And then, but you have to define, or you have to get the player to define what success looks like for them. And if they define success as they're going to be turning up on time, giving the best they have to give, fully committing, managing their mistakes, and getting it wrong, but resetting and going again. When you get them to fully commit to that in the bright days, when it's August, September, and they're just starting, you can always go back to that. You can always reconnect them to that in order to restart, reignite the commitment and the consistency again. Does that answer the question, Coach?
Yeah, I think so, man. I think so. Very, very meaningful response, actually. I think you've given a lot of us a lot of things to think about. And, one of the most important kind of obvious things, Coach, is you mentioned it early in the talk, but you've sort of made the most of these circumstances. It's allowed you to engage in a different way, gain some perspective in certain ways in your professional life. And, I think that's a great message, an underlying message of the session as well, is that we don't have to stagnate during these times. We can absolutely continue to grow and progress and learn. So I just want to say thank you again for your time, for being a part of this, being willing to give back, through the game. And Coach, I wanted to ask you, for the participants, you're getting some great feedback on this chat. There's a lot of these coaches, I think, that would love to be able to reach out to you. Would you be comfortable sharing an email address or something? Is there something that we can shoot out to these participants to get a hold of you?
Sure, no problem, Coach. Well, first of all, let me thank you guys, because you've given me an opportunity to come on here, which means I had to prepare for this. And by preparing for this, I had to go back and dig up my notes, and you forced me to revisit stuff. So you've given me a great opportunity these past 2 days to prepare for this, and that's helped me be a better coach. So, and it's always nice to talk to other coaches and sharpen that tool as well and try to do it succinctly. Me being Irish, I probably talk too much anyway. So, but I want to thank you guys, man. You guys are doing a hell of a job, helping us during these times as well. But yeah, I'm more than happy for any coach to reach out. Probably best way is, there's two best ways really I use most: email and Twitter. My email is Keno14, that's all lowercase, KEANO14 @yahoo.com. And then my Twitter, if you want to hit me a private message or whatever, is @CoachKeen14, CoachKeen14.
Awesome, Coach. And we can share that also with the participants. A lot of these coaches are watching replays because of all the time, changes that we're navigating. But again, Coach Keen, thank you so much. This has been awesome. And we look forward to being in touch with you, and we want to wish you the best in what's next. And you guys stay safe and healthy over there. But thanks so much again for your time.
And thank you very much, guys. Wish you all the best.